excellent colleague Jeremy Lundholm, who, well, as it says there, is with the Departments of Biology and Environmental Science, and Jeremy has also been very involved in leading the Master of Applied Science program, and now our PhD in Applied Science at St. Mary's. I'm a bit envious because he gets a whole roof at St. Mary's, and I don't, but that's all for a good cause, which I'm sure we'll hear more about today. Thanks for coming, Jeremy.
Thank you, Tony. Anyone who wants to work with me on the Green Roof project, I'm welcome anyone who wants to collaborate on this stuff. But it is pretty cool having my own roof because to date, I'm pretty much the only one who used it. Dr. Aldona Wyachek is also starting to use our roof as well, but, which is great. So I'm trained as an ecologist, and so what I'm going to talk about today is more of an ecologist perspective on green infrastructure, but I'll start by defining what I mean by green infrastructure. Actually, I'll start by thanking all the students and collaborators that contributed to this because I tend to ramble on and I never get to my final slide. So if I thank them now, then at least I've covered that, and thank the funders as well. So green infrastructure, it's a buzzword, it's a new term that urban planners and urban ecologists have taken on to describe green spaces in urban areas. The reason we call it green infrastructure is it validates the services that these things provide. Green infrastructure is usually in contrast to gray infrastructure, which we're very familiar with. These are buildings, roads, parking lots, the built environment, right? And they provide services and functions to us, and that's great. But the green infrastructure, so urban street trees, urban forests, even streams in some cases, contribute services as well. So some of these are natural environments, remnants of the original habitats that were here before the city was built. And some of these are under threat, and some of these are shrinking and fragmenting and all that kind of thing. Some of them are environments or ecosystems that we create ourselves. And most of my talk will be about constructed ecosystems, and I'll get to that at some point. Some people actually call urban waterways blue infrastructure, and I'll be focusing mostly on the terrestrial environment, so not so much on the waterways, but they're all over the place, and they provide really valuable services to us. So considering all of this as infrastructure helps us change how we think about the value of these green spaces. That's one idea anyway. There are lots of other perspectives on this as well. So what are the functions and the valuable services these things provide? Well, there's a whole ton of them. I'm not going to go into detail on any one of these. Thermal benefits, they moderate the climate. They protect us from wind if you've got a nice forest, when it's cold and windy in Nova Scotia winters, that kind of thing. It works in summer as well. All this green infrastructure cools the urban environment, so combating the urban heat island, those kind of things. Hydrological functions, allowing infiltration through soil to replenish groundwater, preventing runoff in some cases, lots of valuable hydrological functions. Atmospheric functions are things like trapping pollution, particulate matter, actually absorbing nitrogen compounds into the leaves of plants and detoxifying them, or at least taking them out of the environment. Carbon sequestration, of course, is a big one. Anytime you've got perennial plants, especially woody plants that are incrementally storing carbon every year that they grow, that's a huge service to us, and costs billions of dollars to replace if we lose that service, right? So that's what I call these things services. The biodiversity benefits, basically, green infrastructure provides habitat for lots of living creatures. We benefit from these as well. One specific benefit from living creatures that live in the urban environment is pollination. So as an example, about 8 years ago, I replaced my front lawn with a naturalized habitat, so native plants, shrubs. It looks messy, it's very spontaneous, although we tried to design it and control it. And my neighbors are very patient. My next door neighbor is an avid gardener. Actually, she's an amazing gardener. And what she said is that after we did this, all the other front yards are just lawns. Right? So after we did this, she's got more bees visiting her tomatoes because they can use our flowers, our wildflowers, as resources when they're not getting pollen from the tomato plants. So it's actually helped the local environment in that way. There's huge aesthetic benefits and psychological benefits. A lot of psychology researchers are pursuing this it's a really active research topic. The benefits of urban green space, the benefits of even having potted plants in your office. We benefit greatly from green green infrastructure, just in terms of our own psychology and our own well-being. There's lots of educational value as well. I'll talk a little bit about the Oaks Living Laboratory, so the Oaks Forest that we have here on campus. I'd also like to welcome some of the students and parents from the open house, and so I can introduce our campus environment a little bit more to them as well. But lots of educational opportunities. Increasingly, in North America, urban dwellers are interested in foraging and getting wild foods, and so this is something that green infrastructure can provide as well. Of course, urban agriculture is huge, and growing food in urban areas, people have been gardening in urban areas forever, and in many tropical countries, urban food production is a huge component of local diets. I won't talk about that very much, because I am going to focus on constructed ecosystem, but even on St. Mary's, we have edible food resources on campus. This is chicken of the woods. I've seen it growing in 2 locations on campus, including the Oaks, and including also beside the tower. It's a really tasty fungus. Habitat provisioning. So I had to include this because, I work with plants, but if you can engage the audience by putting cute, cuddly animals on there too, then, so much the better, right? So this is a suburb in Melbourne, Australia, and I was just walking, down the street, and I look up, and there's a koala sleeping against the tree. I guess they sleep when it's hot during the day. Apparently, I should know this as a biologist, but apparently on their butt, they have like this extra thick skin, because pretty much all they do all day long is sit on the hard tree branches, and so they need this extra protection. So they're very highly adapted to this environment. And so again, think about this as green infrastructure. These trees are providing a living habitat for the koala. And koalas are endangered and all that kind of stuff. So I thought that was neat. And this is the context, right? It's a suburb in Australia, and pretty nice place to live. So here's a picture of our Oaks Forest. So St. Mary's owns this. There's a detailed and complicated history of this land parcel, but this is looking at the Oaks Forest from the south across the railroad track, essentially. So this is what it looks like in the fall. It's very nice. It's a great resource for us on campus. We take our students there in classes. So this is green infrastructure, right? This is providing benefits for us. I really exploit it for its educational benefits, because we can take students there. Because it's on campus, we don't have to fill out waivers, right? For them to leave, we have to fill out safety forms and stuff like that. Because it's on campus, we don't have to do that. But also it's a really cool resource. So one of the things with green infrastructure, so this is a natural type habitat, right? That's one type of green infrastructure. It's a remnant of the forest that used to cover HRM. But this kind of green infrastructure is threatened by surrounding land uses and things like that. So one of the things that we've done is try to evaluate how good a shape is it in. And I'll talk about that in a couple slides. But just to reinforce the food value of this, a friend of mine found this huge maitake mushroom in the Oaks Forest, and he took a photo of his baby to show scale. This is a massive mushroom, right? That's probably worth like $100 or more, or maybe even 1,000, I'm not sure. But very few people know about these resources, so there's an educational component here. Like, these things are really quite valuable for us. So a couple of years ago, a master's student at Dalhousie with Peter Dunker in the Ceres department came up with a way of assessing urban forests. So as one type of green infrastructure, urban forests as to how natural they are. So comparing these to a natural forest, how do they stack up? So I took my 4th year biology class out there this winter. Yeah, they were really happy about that. Of course, started in January, so what are you going to do? And so the Dal student had evaluated some of the major urban green infrastructure that we have. So Point Pleasant Park, Shuby Park, Hemlock Ravine. These are highly natural in many characteristics. And we evaluated the Oaks Forest with our class using the same characteristics. So this is only the plant side of things, right? There's a whole bunch of other indicators that will determine, really how healthy your forest is, what kind of services it provides. So this is a plant course, so we look at the plant stuff. And the Oaks actually stacks up really well against some of the better known, larger urban ecosystems. One of the cool things that came out of this work is that we actually have old growth forests, or forests that probably will be considered old growth in 100 years in HRM. Hemlock Ravine Shuby Park has some really amazing old hemlock stands, and they will be old growth if we're not already considering them to be. So the Oaks Forest, not so much, but it's highly natural in terms of how many native trees are there, almost 100% native trees. we're falling behind a little bit. We don't have a lot of really big trees. And it's a younger forest. It was, it's obviously not old growth, anything like that, but it does really well in most of these categories, not so much in coarse woody debris. So I think students or others who are using the forest are moving logs. It's really popular to have bonfires at the edge of the cliff by the railroad tracks in the summer, so that's kind of cool. It's an interesting use. It may not be the use that St. Mary's wants for that property, but it has done some interesting ecological things. Soundscape, not so good because you've got trains coming by and you've got, all that kind of stuff. The way this index works is a 1. I should have explained this. The 1 means it's highly natural, and the 0 means it's not. So it's just a simple index to compare these things. So these are some of the things that we do with our own local green infrastructure and that kind of thing. Each parcel of land, occurs in a larger context as well. So it's not just what goes on that site, it's how a piece of green infrastructure is connected to the rest of the urban environment. And the nice thing about the Oaks is it is connected to this corridor of forest that follows the train tracks all the way, basically from where the peninsula joins onto the mainland, that kind of thing. So we've got this nice corridor. We've got some really beautiful, I hesitate to call these resources, but the service berries that flower in the spring are spectacular. And I think I have mentioned this to members of HRM that we should probably do a big tree planting campaign and get our entire streets covered with these things in the spring. This is what they did in Japan 50, 60 years ago with the cherry blossoms, and now it's a national or international phenomenon because they all flower at the same time, and they're very beautiful, and there's festivals about them and all this kind of stuff. So we've got some of these resources right here. Part of the problem with green infrastructure is we take it for granted, especially living in Nova Scotia. You drive for 10 minutes out of town and you're in the bush. Like, forest is everywhere, and so this is one of the problems. We need to value this stuff. Green core in the fall. So far I've talked about, large scale, large parcels of land, Point Pleasant Park, Shelby Park, big urban forests, these are great. But green infrastructure occurs at a variety of scales, and we don't always recognize that a particular spot actually has a living ecosystem on it that produces some benefits for us. So street trees are another example. These are highly maintained, so we spend a lot of money collectively as a society to maintain street trees, but we've also got green infrastructure occurring at a tiny scale, right? On my street, we've got a sidewalk, and every crack between 2 sidewalk pavers had a plant community in it. Now, how valuable are these things? Are they storing a lot of carbon? Probably not. Are they, are they contributing to our stormwater management? Probably not. But people are increasingly interested in these kinds of communities, and if you go to Japan, again, people are studying mosses. Everyday people have moss clubs where they go to look at mosses. So there's an aesthetic component, there's a psychological benefit. If we can recognize these tiny little habitats as having some value, then it enriches our lives, so it's great. This is actually Reykjavik, and they've got these beautiful violets flowering, growing in a couple centimeters of soil, so it's kind of neat. It's hard to argue for the value of these things because just economically, they're not contributing very much. They're not going to store a lot of carbon and all that kind of stuff, but they're still cool, and some of them are quite interesting, right? So all shapes and sizes. That's the idea. Now, in some cultures and in some countries and some areas, green infrastructure is highly valued, and we spend a lot of money to maintain that green infrastructure. So this is Hong Kong. This is a retaining wall on an eroding slope that would basically become a landslide if people didn't take steps to use sort of a hard engineering solution and protect it. But they've accommodated the trees that are growing there already by basically just providing them a little window. Now, this obviously provides challenges for the trees because they get enough water, is there enough nutrients, that kind of thing. But it's better than having that whole slope, go downhill basically, right? So yeah, in a very dense urban population, urban center, some of the best green spaces are sort of relegated to these crazy slopes, and but they're quite amazing. So it works the other way as well. There are conflicts between gray and green infrastructure. So plants and buildings don't always get along. All right, plants can cause problems. This wall, for example, is being colonized by these banyan trees, it's a strangler fig, basically. They're amazing trees, but the roots do damage the infrastructure. So if you want those trees to be there, people do appreciate them. They've done studies on this. They have some value. But you've got to invest in this infrastructure. So my talk title was Sustainability and Green Infrastructure. And very simply, trying to figure out if infrastructure is sustainable or not requires accounting for the costs and benefits. And so the question we're always asking is, do the benefits outweigh the costs? And when we say costs and benefits, we mean environmental, we mean economic, every way you can count costs and benefits, essentially. And so this is part of the costs. We've got to maintain this infrastructure. If that wall is damaged by the plant roots, we have to do something about it, right? And it costs money. So this is the challenge of living with green infrastructure. Plants view the gray infrastructure, the built environment that we create, they view them as habitats. Right? A plant lands here and grows in the environment that it landed in, and if there happens to be a tree to climb up as a vine, that's great. If it happens to be an artificial tree in the form of a telephone pole, that's fine too. Right? So it's a living environment. These are ecosystems, and many of the organisms that live in cities are colonizing them as a habitat, and these are real ecosystems. We also have conflicts in some cases between our green infrastructure in cities and people. So this is a warning sign. This is a campus I visited in Japan, in the western side of Tokyo, and they have a really big urban forest on campus. It's huge. It's got a bamboo plantation, and seniors are often in there really early in the morning in the spring harvesting bamboo shoots. So there's food resources there. But you see a sign like this and you say, oh my God, what's going on? It's a wild boar. They have wild boars in this forest apparently. So I was a bit skeptical when I first saw this sign. I said, oh, you're kidding me. The forest isn't that big. It's probably the size of Point Pleasant Park. Right? There's no wild boars or wild, there's not a lot of large mammals in Point Pleasant Park inside people. So I was skeptical, partially because the cartoon just wasn't that threatening to me personally, but also because I just doubted that boars were there until I actually saw a wild boar at night in the forest or near the forest. It was only this big, so it was a baby, but if you've got a baby wild boar, you've also got the mama boar somewhere. And so I tailed it out of there, right? So, I mean, if we want these green infrastructure and if they're fairly natural, they are going to pose hazards, right? So we have to be careful. There's also a poisonous snake on this campus. It's a little tiny thing like this, but if it bites you, you could die. So, again, maybe not the most threatening sign, but as you'll gather from this talk, I'm very fond of collecting warning signs from different places that I visit. So if anyone has any good ones, send them my way. The other thing about green infrastructure, because it's closely integrated with where people live and work, the culture of the people living in a particular place is important as well. So how we deal with these threats or these challenges is very culturally specific, right? There's a certain kind of sign that you see in Japan that you won't see other places, and so there's an interesting cultural piece there. And so a lot of this research is interdisciplinary, looking at the social side of things. There's cultural anthropology. There's all kinds of different elements to it. Not just biological hazards. There's just the danger of falling off a cliff. If you've got a natural forest, it's not necessarily going to be flat and easy to walk on, so you have to be careful. The oaks forest on campus here, if you walk off of our property, you will fall down a cliff into the railroad tracks. Okay, so there's we have to be aware of these things, and especially if we're bringing students out there, we have to do this. But it cuts both ways. Humans can damage green infrastructure just by everyday activity. So you have this park in downtown Tokyo where they've pretty much outlawed everything, maybe including even fun. So basically you can't do it there. But it's a real danger. Point Pleasant Park, if you visit it, if you walk off the trail or even to the side of the trail, there's a high likelihood you're going to step in dog poop, right? And so this is an issue, right? There are conflicting land uses, just like every piece of land has, and when the public's involved, you've got competing interests for different populations in our society. So that's just part of the deal. So we've got to deal with all this stuff. I'm really interested in not just the manicured environments like the street trees that we have and people's nice gardens and that kind of thing, but spontaneous urban vegetation. And this is what you see in vacant lots. We got vacant lots all over Halifax. Most cities, especially ones undergoing rapid development, will have vacant lots. These tend to be temporary habitats because essentially just waiting, for a building to be built there. But if you think about, I'm thinking on Roby Street across from the hospital, there's a vacant lot that's been vacant for at least 15 years, right? With all the Japanese knotweed in there, I think the soil's contaminated or something. So these habitats can actually have value. The longer they stick around, it's possible the larger the value will have. So we've done a study on some of the urban vegetation, the spontaneous vegetation, vacant lot vegetation in HRM, and we were astounded by the biodiversity we found there. Now, most of it's weeds, so plants that people may not want. About 50% of the plant species we find in these environments are not native plants, but they have huge value for insects and birds and other critters that live in this area. So the habitat value, the service of habitat provision provided by these areas is huge. So we've done a bit of work on this, and it turns out that the more plant species and the larger the area, the more invertebrates that you have there. And invertebrates, mostly these were insects. Invertebrates, covers all of it because we caught lots of spiders and slugs and all kinds of neat stuff as well. And again, comes back to another issue of optics. Not everyone is keen on invertebrates per se. Bugs, many people don't like bugs. If we're attracting bees to our roof, lots of people are allergic to bee stings and they may not be keen on that. Right? However, these are important ecosystem services, and so we're trying to research, how our different habitats can provide these services in urban areas. Okay, finally, this is what I will focus on for the rest of my talk, is constructed ecosystems. This is a major research focus in my lab, and it's definitely something that's becoming more interesting all over the world. So I show this slide. This is Singapore. These are sky trees, so they're artificial trees, and they've got vegetation, real plants growing up the sides of these things. I haven't seen them yet. I'd really like to get to Singapore someday because these are really cool. Singapore's doing a lot with green infrastructure, probably because the entire country is like one big city, right? So if you want green space, in many cases you've got to build it yourself because it was originally destroyed. So this is what it looks like having been constructed. The construction shot was to emphasize the constructed nature of these ecosystems. So they're artificial, they're made by us, and they're made to perform specific functions. All right, so that's part of the constructed ecosystem definition. They come in, again, lots of different shapes and sizes, and one of the things I want to convey to you today is some of the different types of constructed ecosystems that are part of this broader picture of green infrastructure. So this is the Hundertwasser house in Vienna, and it's sort of it's a really cool building. I haven't been there myself, but lots of people send me pictures of it. So it's one example of how you can build green infrastructure right into the gray infrastructure and have these together on the same site. And I also show this to illustrate, again, the cultural dimensions of how this plays out. Urban forests are there, sometimes they're parks, so the public can use them, so that's one aspect of how culture may interact with these systems. But here's a case where this is a privately owned building, and a big name architect created this, a really famous architect, right? So there's, this is sort of the elite side of green infrastructure, right? Who's going to be able to afford this home, right? So there's those questions that come into it. Who can afford this? Who gets the benefits of green infrastructure? There's a bit more of the social side. But then we see the grassroots side of green infrastructure. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So here's another kind of green roof, in this case made from recycled pop bottles in Bogota, Colombia. And they're growing food, right? So this is a food garden for people who don't have enough space to have a garden plot at ground level. It also takes advantage of runoff from the roof, so they're harvesting roof water and reusing it. So that actually helps with urban runoff, because instead of all that water going into the sewer system or causing erosion or causing flooding that kills people, we can actually use that water to grow plants with. So this is a great project, and because it's done on the cheap, again, it has a broader appeal. So culturally, just a different set of society has access to this kind of green infrastructure. It's like community garden, that kind of thing. So text-heavy slide, but constructed ecosystems, one of the reasons I like talking about them as a collection of different ecosystems is that the people that work on them don't necessarily collaborate. So the people that are working on the rain gardens may not know anything about green roofs. The people that are working on sewage treatment wetlands have nothing to do with living walls, that kind of thing. But to me, they're very similar because they're constructed ecosystems and they have a lot in common. So I'll show you in my diagrams how I conceive of these as one big, set of ecosystems. I won't spend too much time on this. It's pretty detailed for a general audience. But we get ecosystem services out of these. That's why we spend money to build them, right? So we have inputs, we have construction costs, we have maintenance costs, but we get something out of it, right? We get a whole bunch of different ecosystem services, and I'll outline what some of those are for the different types of constructed ecosystems. But as ecosystems go, again, remember, I'm an ecologist, I'm a plant ecologist. If these are ecosystems, one of the interesting things is, well, how do they differ from a natural ecosystem? How does my green roof differ from, what's on the ground on campus? So there's lots of similarities. How does it differ from a natural forest, for example? One of the things is that they're containerized for the most part. So they have really discrete boundaries. It's like you can draw a line where the ecosystem starts and where it stops. Of course, it interacts with all the other ecosystems, but they tend to be self-contained. They tend to be small in size, which does tend to limit their value, right? So we have to consider that, right? A living wall in the atrium is fantastically large as living walls go, but in terms of the actual number of plants there, it's tiny compared to what's on campus outside, right? So we have small size. They tend to be novel ecosystems. There's all kinds of other features about them that I won't get into now, but the main thing for me is that what's living in these ecosystems drives their functions. And if we want to improve their functions relative to their costs, we need to think very closely about what's living there and how it functions and how the different biotic components get along with each other. Because it's usually not just one species, it's usually an entire community of plants, of microorganisms, of insects, and all that kind of stuff. So we need to think ecologically about it. I'm going to start with water treatment wetlands. There used to be one in Annapolis Royal. I'm not sure if it's still functioning. Has anyone seen it? There was a cool sewage treatment wetland there about 10 years ago. I'm not sure if it's still there. But basically, we're using wetland vegetation to create an artificial environment that cleans water, right? Sewage specifically, and other kinds of contaminated water. Using my schema here, so I'm gonna create a diagram so I can compare these and showing all the inputs and the outputs. Wastewater goes in, the plants and the microbes that live in the plant roots process that water, and treated water comes out. Basically, it may not be drinkable, but nevertheless, it's a water treatment process. So this is great. Other ecosystem functions are supported by these ecosystems as well, right? If they're outdoors, then they can be habitat for lots of things. So the multifunctionality of green infrastructure is one really important component that needs to be incorporated in cost-benefit analysis. So if you just look at one function while treating water, maybe it's cheaper just to put a chlorine tablet in it, right? But if you look at all the other benefits, then these technologies become a lot more valuable in terms of their function as green infrastructure. Some of these energy production, this is interesting, they're actually building algal fuel cells as part of sewage treatment plants to produce electricity. Like, how cool is that, right? So it's an ecosystem that not only processes wastewater, but produces electricity. So there's all kinds of cool potential for this thing to really take off. And there are, encouragingly, thousands and thousands of researchers working on this stuff. So it's a really cool area of interest. A related type of constructed ecosystem are rain gardens or bioswales. And we do have some of these in HRM. NSCC Waterfront Campus put some of these in when they did their big renovation, probably 4 years ago now. Similar to a treatment wetland, these are intercepting water as runoff. And part of that, the runoff can be very contaminated because it's running through the streets, picking up metals and other, junk from cars and that kind of thing. But it also acts as a stormwater management tool because basically it allows water to infiltrate back into the ground and less runoff going into our urban infrastructure. So in HRM right now, we treat all the water that goes into our drains, which is awesome because before we didn't. But we pay for each liter that goes into that system, whether it's rainwater, whether it's like toilet water, whether, regardless, it all gets mixed together and Now it's all contaminated because it's mixed, and we have to treat every single liter. So every liter we can reroute and use in other ways saves our entire society money. Right? So that's what these things do. So it's pretty much, it's very similar. There's a little bit more complexity because compared to a treatment wetland, we often allow infiltration. So this actually recharges the groundwater, and we got our treated water coming off the surface as well. Cool thing about rain gardens or bioswales is that in contrast to a sewage treatment wetland or something like that, people can do this on their own, right? This is something that there's a grassroots element to this. People are building rain gardens in their yards. I built one. It's really easy. It's basically just, make sure the water goes into the ground and feeding the plants instead of going into the sewer infrastructure. Kind of easy, right? Whereas a sewage treatment wetland, you've got to have, major infrastructure. It's going to be something that municipalities, governments are involved with, companies are involved with. So here's one where, it's a little more accessible. We could be building these on St. Mary's campus. We've got lots of potential for this. Here's on the other extreme, where for the most part, private citizens are putting container gardens together. Now, you might think this is weird. This is a constructed ecosystem. It is a constructed ecosystem. It's highly bounded in space. Like you can, the pot provides a really severe boundary for those plants. In some parts of the world, this is a really important part of green infrastructure. I'll just show you a picture. These are Asian cities have lots of this stuff. This is the only green infrastructure in this entire neighborhood, right? So pollinators, what are they going to eat? They're going to be going to these plants because there are no other plants, right? So these could be really important. It's interesting too because, you can go downtown in Halifax and you'll see large container plantings that the municipalities put there. So the government can be involved. Corporate headquarters like these things as well. We put these indoors, that kind of thing. But in some countries, it's largely a grassroots thing. Individual property owners are doing this, and they can come into conflict with other land uses. So in Japan specifically, some of these gardens, people have actually encroached on the street on purpose as a traffic calming mechanism because they're complaining to the municipality that cars are going through our neighborhood too quickly. So you slowly start to expand your garden into the street, slows down traffic, gives you more space for gardening, and these folks, sometimes seniors, get into trouble with the authorities. So it's a form of guerrilla gardening, and it's very interesting. Again, the social side of this stuff is super interesting. So I'm very interested in these gardens simply because they're so diverse. It's amazing how many different plant species live there. Now, if any of you have gardened, most of you probably have, or taken care of houseplants, you know how much maintenance these things require. So think about the cost side. I can see what the benefits are. In many cases, we haven't quantified those benefits because no one's taken these seriously as ecosystems, right? No one's taken this as a serious component of green infrastructure, but it really is. But we know what the costs are, right? You got to water these things if it gets dry. The soil probably comes from elsewhere. These are not like gardens in your backyard where you're using the native soil. You're getting that soil from somewhere. All these material and input costs have to be factored into the overall equation of how this stuff works. So, but I think they're really cool. I like houseplants, although I have a hell of a time keeping them alive. So, if you go to my lab, we basically have a really, really impressive selection of extremely drought-tolerant plants because all the other ones have died. So a slightly different take on this gets back to what I did in my front yard, creating a natural habitat instead of having a lawn. So it's not containerized, it's not really a constructed ecosystem per se because we're using the native soil, it's just another kind of gardening. But these habitats can be really valuable. Some municipalities, in this case Portland, Oregon, have actually created a certification program for people that transform their lawns into natural habitats to validate it as something beneficial, recognizing that we get more services from this kind of habitat than we do lawns, although it depends on how you use your lawn. If you're out there barbecuing and playing soccer every day, then that's a function as well, right? That's a valid use of that land. But in many cases, people don't use their lawns that much. For me personally, stopping mowing the front lawn was a great thing for me. So, and like I said, I have really supportive neighbors. Of course, you've probably heard in the news about some of the conflicts that these kinds of yards provide. Some people get arrested because their neighbors complain that they've got weeds in their front yard. So this is, you know, part of the education side of green infrastructure. Now let's talk about living walls. So this is the atrium. This is what it looked like last year when it was nice and healthy. If you've been there recently, it's under construction. So right from the get-go, this is a very expensive kind of green infrastructure, and it has high maintenance costs, in part because it's inside. So when we take an ecosystem inside from outside, we simplify it, and in simplifying it, you know, some of the things that would go on in that ecosystem, for example, these plants are plagued by insects that eat them. If this was outside, there would be an entire ecosystem of other critters that would also, you know, help to keep those insects in check. Birds, for example, we don't have birds in the atrium. I'd love to see that, but imagine what problems would cause. What if the atrium mainly used by students studying, right? Imagine bird poop going on all those laptops and textbooks. So what we have to do is we have to add our own inputs. We have to spend money and energy, resources, that kind of thing, on protecting these plants. So one of our profs, Dr. Susan Bjornson in biology, has started the biocontrol program. So she's releasing, you know, beneficial insects that will eat the pests of the plants. But that takes time, right? It takes money. You've got to pay a student to do it. You have to, you know, all that kind of stuff. So goes without saying, you can't actually grow these plants in Nova Scotia outside. These are all tropical rainforest understory plants. So, you know, that's another issue. But it's still a really cool ecosystem. It's under construction right now because it had some problems with waterproofing. So again, one of the conflicts between green infrastructure and gray infrastructure. We don't want to compromise the functions of our buildings. So we don't want our green roofs to leak because it's harder to repair a leak on a green roof than it is on a regular roof. So these are all things we have to think about. Living walls are really interesting though, but the verticality of them, the fact that the plants are growing, you know, essentially in a cliff environment, makes it a lot more challenging to keep the plants alive. This is my favorite living wall. This is NSCC Waterfront Campus, and it was put together about 5 years ago, and it's a really cool example of a grassroots project. So it was done by NSCC. The students grew all the plants. They came up with their own soil mixes. They had to engineer these baskets to hold the soil. You can almost see the metal framework behind there holding the soil in there. They had to do all the plant selections themselves. No one knew what plants would grow on a living wall outdoors in Nova Scotia because no one had really done it before. Massively successful. I was at a green roof conference where the people who put this together were presenting this, and then, you know, one of the questions from the audience was, well, how much did this cost? And she said, well, okay, well, we had to, you know, you got to include this cost, this cost, this cost, this cost. And all in all, it came to about $200,000. And you could actually hear jaws hitting the tables. Like, because if this was done by a corporation, it would have cost at least $2 million, right? With the exact same product, right? So the grassroots thing is great. But these are really hard to maintain. And, you know, it has suffered in recent years. I haven't been there recently, but it's tricky. So let's talk about how these things work. They do provide many of the same ecosystem functions that other green infrastructure would provide. In some cases, because there is soil there, they can retain stormwater. Although again, being vertical, gravity is a strong force drawing that water off of your wall. And that's why it's so hard to keep plants alive on that wall. So the indoor living wall that we have on campus here has a bit of a different structure. It's got compartments. It's got air intake, so drawing the air through it. I'll explain why in a sec. But it's also got constant water cycling through it to keep those plants alive. It costs money to run the pump. Right? Outdoors, if you want to do that, that's more tricky. The reason it's got a fan beside it, and this is called an active living wall, because it's actively drawing air through it. The whole purpose of this living wall was to purify the air and save us energy by doing that. So, you know, in a building like this, we have to exchange the air, you know, every, a few times a day, because it gets polluted, right? We've got volatile organic carbon compounds coming from printers and computers and things like that. We've got CO2 coming out of our bodies. There's no plants in this room, right? There's no plants releasing oxygen. So without some way of purifying the air inside, basically the solution, the gray infrastructure solution, is to simply replace the air on a regular basis with outdoor air. Well, what happens in our climate when we replace indoor air with outdoor air?
Outdoor air is not the right temperature. Like, when is it ever the right temperature in Nova Scotia, right? Never. So in winter, you got to spend money to heat the air to room temperature. In summer, you have to cool it. Or if you're in, the old McNally Main building, you don't cool it because there's no air conditioning, and you have to move people out when there's a heat wave. Do you remember that, Tony? When for 2 weeks we had a heat wave about 5 years ago, maybe. So the idea is by spending money to build this fan and all this kind of thing to purify the indoor air, we don't have to exchange the outdoor air as many times, and we save energy because we don't have to condition as much outdoor air. That's the idea. So those are the positive side. The negative side, as you know, is high maintenance costs. Things go wrong. It leaks. That kind of thing. But a lot of this is engineering, that kind of thing, engineering solutions as well. When they're outdoors, they can provide urban heat island benefits by cooling local microclimates, that kind of thing. Not so much indoors, but there's all kinds of benefits with these things. If you visit the atrium, I think probably the best thing about it is just how it looks visually. It's just great to have it there, but there's also a sound associated with it because of the water constantly cycling. So it's got, it's like being, a couple hundred meters from a big waterfall. It's very nice. So the psychological benefits, we haven't studied this, but they're probably, my guess is that they outweigh the cost, although the initial cost apparently was huge. Companies build these things, and you have to pay the company to come in and do this because it's pretty technical skills. There is sort of a populist or sort of a ground up or a grassroots side of these. You can do this yourself just with like potted plants and containers, but on this scale, it requires a lot more investment. It's a big thing, right? It's difficult. And there's all kinds of examples of these all over the place. But in general, they cost a lot to maintain, and overall, especially the outdoor ones, especially in places like Australia, where water comes at a premium, these may not be really sustainable in many cases. I think this one in Iceland is because there's water there anyway. Mosses grow like crazy in Iceland. It's one of their main forms of vegetation. But this moss wall in Japan is suffering. Most of it's not green because the moss has died, because it's just really hard to keep the moss alive on this vertical surface. Okay, so these are challenges. In many cases, we can talk about greenwashing because it looks great. On your corporate headquarters, have a fantastic living wall right in the front of it, but is it really that green? That's the question we're trying to ask. That's the sustainability piece. And again, I've gone on and on about how high maintenance these things are. So let's talk about roofs. So I'll finish by talking about roofs and some of my own research. Functions of a normal roof on a building are very important. Waterproofing is the big one, right? What's the point of having a building if it rains inside every time it rains outside, right? That's pretty fundamental. So let's just recognize that that's important. But a lot of our roofs also have a secondary function of containing other infrastructure important to the building, so the HVAC system, heating, cooling, all that kind of stuff, that's great. If you want to start using the space for other things, you have to make sure you don't compromise those primary functions of the roof. So that said, there's still lots of other things we can do with roofs. Photovoltaics, green roofs, which is what I research. So green roofs are great. Another good example of a constructed ecosystem that provides multiple functions, and that could be, if we get enough of these things set up, an important component of green infrastructure in general in our cities. Some parts of the world have over 50% cover of green roofs in their buildings in certain jurisdictions. Germany's one of the biggest. Lots of German cities have lots of green roofs. North America, Toronto's getting a lot of green roofs. They actually have a bylaw that stipulates if you have a building over a certain footprint, you must put a green roof on it. So these are larger institutional or industrial buildings for the most part. If you don't put a green roof on it, you pay a fine that goes into a green roof research fund, so I'm told. But green roofs do all kinds of great things. So they have the thermal moderation, so they cool the roof in the summer. They prevent heat loss in the winter, or they at least minimize heat loss in the winter. They intercept rain, and so some of the plants use that rain, and it goes back to the atmosphere as evapotranspiration, so you can reduce the amount of runoff. The other thing we have to look at for these constructed ecosystems is there's often already a gray infrastructure solution that produces some of the same functions. So the engineering solutions have been around forever, right? Well, runoff's a problem. Well, retain all your water in a cistern, and you can reuse that for gray water in toilets, that kind of thing. For thermal benefits, you know what? Modern day nice thick insulation is way cheaper than a green roof, right? So if you want to save energy in your building, you stack up the insulation because it's way cheaper than a green roof. What some of these constructed ecosystems do is under the banner of multifunctionality. So yeah, sure, you can get a better response or a cheaper way of saving energy in your building by putting insulation there, but that's not going to do anything for stormwater. It's not going to do anything for habitat. Insulation, to my knowledge, has no psychological benefits for people. I mean, it's good that it's there, but we kind of think about it, right? So green roofs and some of these other types of green infrastructure are multifunctional, and that's where their true value comes at least that's why I'm still working on it. Because otherwise, just pay the engineers. They know how to do it. They know how to fix this stuff, right? But as an ecologist, we don't really know how to provide good habitat for other organisms in urban environments. So that's one of the things that I work with. I was told to keep this to 45 minutes, but it's never happened in the past. So green roofs come in two types, basically shallow soil versus deep soil. We call the shallow ones extensive green roofs. Most of my research is based on extensive systems because the industry in North America, most green roofs are put on by companies, right? So the private sector field that does this. It's thought that because they don't have as much soil, because they don't weigh as much, there's a much bigger market for extensive shallow soil green roofs. It's probably true. Definitely more of these are actually implemented. You see these in more places. So that's what we're working on. It's also where the challenges to plant growth and other components of the living ecosystem have the most challenges because you're trying to minimize weight, but also maximize all these other services. So that's what my research is focused on, is how to, get the biggest bang for your buck, keep the plants alive, derive as many services as we can, while keeping costs and, weight loading on your roof to a minimum. So that's what we're trying to do. Here's the atrium green roof, built in 2010. Really awesome that we have that. What's happened in North America, I have to put this quote in here because it drives my entire research program, at least on green roofs. What's happened over the last, probably 40 years since they became popular in Germany, is that the companies that design green roofs, they're trying to sell a product. Because every building has to have a waterproof roof before you can even talk about a green roof, right? So the green roof goes over top of the waterproofing. A green roof is always an extra cost. And it's one of the first things that get cut, during the planning stage of the buildings. The new pavilion down at the Oval. I talked to the architects a year and a half ago because they wanted to put a green roof on that. I see now that there is no green roof on that, and it's been built. And this has happened so many times because it's expensive, right? So you've got to have, basically it's easy to cut a green roof. And so the industry is trying to make these as cheap as possible so that maybe during that planning stage it won't get cut. And of course we have examples of real green roofs, so it does happen. The industry is still going, these companies are still viable. But their solution was to come up with a really simplistic plant community and not put much effort into the other ecological aspects of the green roof. So you end up with this low diversity solution which doesn't provide the full range of services that a green roof can provide. So you get things like roof lawns, which, it's like a lawn but on top of a roof. Okay, it's good. It still provides probably a greater range of benefits than a pavement roof, which is, hard to argue against. That happens. It's not really high in biodiversity, but, it's some lawns are more biodiverse than others. In HRM for the last 12 or more, 15 years maybe, we've had a pesticide ban. So people's lawns are actually quite biodiverse in terms of the plant communities. If you let some of these weeds actually flower, then that becomes a pollinator resource. So lawns, lawns have their value, okay? Greenwashing, right? This is an example of the other kind. So we've got roof lawns, but we've also got the sedum roof. Sedums are a type of plant which are succulent. People grow them in rock gardens. They're really hard to kill because they're very, very, very drought tolerant. So this is the other industry standard type of green roof that we're seeing built all over the place. And great, okay, so they do provide a lot of functions. They work well for the industry because they're almost impossible to kill. They're cheap. They're easy to propagate. Some of these species, you basically chop them up with a knife and throw them on gravel, and they'll start to grow, right? So it's not even, you don't have to grow them in, little pots and then transfer them to bigger pots. You don't have to do that. They're really easy. They do provide good performance of some services. So the cooling function in summer is great. They're really good at making this dense blanket. They reflect some of the solar radiation so it doesn't heat up the surface. Great. And they shade the rest of the soil, so basically no sun can get to the soil surface. So that's cool. Some of them provide pollinator benefits. So you can see there's a lot of floral resources here. A lot of bees would come to this roof and use this. Unfortunately, they don't perform that well for some of the other functions. Because they're so drought tolerant, they use very little water. They just sit there, hold water in their stems and leaves. And in order for a green roof to function well hydrologically, you need plants to lift that water out of the soil so that the next time it rains, there'll be more space to hold the water. It's like a sponge, If your sponge is saturated, you bring it out. It's not going to hold any more water if it's saturated, right? And so these end up with really saturated roofs because they don't use the water. So it's also a monoculture. Many of the sedum roofs have 5 or 6 species of sedums. So from a species perspective, there's more than one species on there, but it's a genus monoculture, right? It's the same genus, sedum, or at least the same family. It's the same type of plant all over, right? And these are being deployed all over North America, all over Europe, all over Asia. They're great, but they do have limitations. So what I'm trying to do in my lab is acknowledge that we need plants to survive. So a key part of the green infrastructure is the actual green. So we have to have the plants survive. At the same time, we need to minimize costs, so we want them to survive in a really shallow soil. So it creates big challenges. It's also a novel ecosystem. It's highly simplified. It doesn't have all of the extra inputs that a natural ecosystem would have. There's all kinds of things that make it different. So plants are hard to keep alive. There's trade-offs, right? If we wanted plants to survive better, we'd put more soil there. Right? Deeper soil increases plant survival. So what we're trying to figure out is, well, how shallow can we do this and still have plants that survive? So what it comes down to for my research is choosing the right plants for the job. We use native plants. We're trying to figure out which native plants, first of all, survive, which ones will coexist with each other so you get an actual community of multiple species so that, if one dies, you've got another species to take its place, that kind of thing. So biodiversity is important. And we're trying to maximize the provision of all of the ecosystem services that we get from a green roof while minimizing the cost. So we do things like, try to figure out which species and what characteristics these species have maximize which benefits, right? So is it shorter, relatively short plants or relatively tall plants? What seems to be the best in this case? Tall plants, relatively tall plants seem to do well, but you can't have plants that are too tall or they won't survive in shallow soils. Right? We're also interested in figuring out whether we get a better benefit from a diverse planting of a whole bunch of different species or different plant types versus a monoculture. So we do things like, we take these 3 grass species, grow them separately, and then grow them together in a mixture and compare how much water they retain. And sometimes we do find that the diverse mixtures do perform better, right? So that's a great finding. Is essentially, this is in the same soil, right? So 1 species versus 3 species, everything else is the same. So your total cost is the same, but if you're using 3 species, you get a higher benefit, right? So we're increasing the sustainability of the entire system by, upping our benefit and keeping our costs the same. We've also examined, I'm going to rush through this, but we've also examined, in a building like the atrium, green roof, we've got shade from surrounding buildings. How does this affect the benefits that come off of this? How does this affect the plants? We've got huge differences in soil moisture just caused by shadows, right? So this is that atrium triangle is right there. And in the middle of summer, this is like the hottest, driest time of year when it counts most for the plants. This is what the water availability in the soil looks like. So, red is dry, blue is wet, and a difference between like 7% and 26% is pretty big, and it does make a difference for the plants. You can see where the plants died in a particular year, and this is just the temperature difference 15, 16 degrees on the very same day. These are all measured within an hour of each other. That's a big difference for plants. So we want to figure out how these things affect the ecosystem functions. We want to find out how the ecosystem functions change in different times of the year over different weather conditions. So one of the things we've done here, because we're in a northern climate, we looked at the effect of snow on green roofs and found that it makes a huge difference. If you have more vegetation, more snow will be trapped, and you'll get more or less a better benefit, more energy savings in the winter, except when the sun's shining, because snow reflects sunlight. When the sun's shining, you're better off having a conventional roof with nothing on it, because some of that energy is going to go back and going to go into our building and reduce our heating costs. So it really depends on the time of year and all that kind of stuff. So I won't get into that. I need to breeze by this. I'm almost done. But we're also looking at pollinators. We found that in terms of the insects and other critters that live on green roofs, they're often comparable to what we find at ground level in other green infrastructure like parks, that kind of thing. So that's very interesting. The idea that something on top of a building can provide a habitat for pollinators. So we've got students examining bees that come to our green roof flowers. Emily Walker's finding out what pollen they're carrying. So have they visited another spot on the ground? Are they restricting their pollen collection to the green roof? And how does this compare with what would happen in a natural environment? So this is what it comes down to. I've got about 2 slides left, so I think I'm okay. Green infrastructure, especially constructed ecosystems, are supposed to increase the overall sustainability of our society, especially in urban areas. That's the idea. But for that to make sense, the individual components of the green infrastructure, so the actual ecosystems we're constructing, in my case, have to themselves be sustainable. So the benefits we get out of them have to outweigh the costs that we put into them, very simply. So there's a couple cases where, many cases, the green roof industry, led by private companies, is good at tooting its own horn, and they make lots of claims about how valuable these ecosystems are for local biodiversity. So in other words, they're good habitats for things that otherwise have a hard time surviving in cities. But there's very little evidence for this, and in fact, some of the evidence collected by one of my former students suggests that in some cases, green infrastructure, like a green roof on a really tall building, may have a negative impact on bees, for example. What happens in this case is that bees are attracted to this environment, so they have to spend a lot of energy to fly to a really tall building on a green roof. And especially the smaller bees, once they set up their nests, they don't leave. They forage from a very small area. So that area has to have all the resources they need. They can't afford to be going off the roof to another ecosystem. And if we attract the bees up there, but there's not enough up there for them, it has a negative impact on their populations. And that increases the higher the building is. The low buildings, probably okay, because they can access some other resources. The higher the building, the worse. So, as a scientist, my job is to, take on these claims of industry and actually test them and see if there is a net benefit. I'd like to think there is. I like green roofs. I think they're cool. They're certainly interesting to study. But if they're not going to provide a net benefit, then we can't mislead the public by, claiming benefits that don't exist. So, how are we doing with green infrastructure in Halifax, in the HRM? I don't know if anyone would recognize where this picture is taken. I like the picture because it looks like we've got a native Acadian forest growing out of the building. This forest is now gone. It's been clear cut, right? This is Bears Lake. This is the Whopper Drop. This is an area that's been totally, clear cut and left with nothing on it for, over a year now, right? Almost, you guys rescued some plants last spring, right? So what I'll say, just very briefly, is that we don't always do a good job of protecting the green infrastructure that's already there. So, the question of building, artificial ecosystems, this is the problem we need to tackle. We need to acknowledge the value of what's already here, essentially our heritage, what we've inherited from previous generations, make the best of that. In some situations, constructed ecosystems can play a role, but really, in HRM, this is my opinion, this is what it comes down to. Finally, as you can imagine, there are lots of barriers to properly managing green infrastructure creating more green infrastructure in the form of all these constructed ecosystems. This is a model, right? This was in the corporate headquarters of a company in Japan that sells green roofs, but also makes textiles and all kinds of other things. I think the connection is that they use the textiles to make these mats that go under their green roofs. So that's the kind of thing. I'd love to see cities where we have entire buildings covered with living walls and that kind of thing. Cost is a huge one. In a province like Nova Scotia, where our cities aren't that big, so in terms of things like urban heat island, urban sprawl, they are issues. I'm not sure if we actually have an urban heat island here. My students tried to measure one. We probably do at some times of the year, but it's hard to detect. The problem also is that our coastline is so heterogeneous, and so you get these coastal effects. How do you separate that from the urban heat island? But in any case, cost is a big one. Why aren't we seeing green roofs all over the place in Halifax, for example? Well, some of the benefits just aren't that great here. So cooling the roof in the summer, how long is our summer actually, right? It's not that long. So you're going to save a lot more money by, saving energy in the winter than by saving a little bit of energy in the summer. And, the winter benefits of green roofs in terms of energy savings are quite small. And again, bang for your buck, insulation is a better deal. I think the biggest possible lever that we could use to encourage more green roof construction in HRM is stormwater. A lot of municipalities in Nova Scotia have flooding issues, and we also have the cost of treating all this waste that comes off. But green roofs aren't the only solution. A lot of these green infrastructure projects, rain gardens, just protecting natural ecosystems like forests, keeping them going, can make a big impact on stormwater as well. I know HRM is looking into things like rain gardens and bioswales and that kind of thing. So I think I'll leave it at that for now. This was my final slide, but I have a whole bunch of other slides if anyone's interested in any particular aspect of the green roof research. I've tried to keep it relatively non-technical, but of course, if anyone's interested, we've got lots of technical details. Thanks.
We can take some time for questions, but just in case anybody does need to leave, and you should feel free to do that, I just want to mention two things. One is that next week is our break week here at St. Mary's, so there is no talk in this series. You come back with Emily Chapman on February 26th, looking at mercury and arsenic in mining waste. Slight change of pace there. And also, if you're not on the mailing list for this seminar series and you'd like to be, there is a sign-up sheet here. Just leave your email address. If you need to go on the earlier side, please, I'll put that up there right now. So, questions for Jeremy or comments?
Yeah. I'll shoot a question to start us off. Was the political announcement, the Liberals, that they're making all this funding available for infrastructure, has that been earmarked already for gray infrastructure in the classic sense, or is there excitement for some availability for green infrastructure?
I don't know yet. I'm hopeful for green infrastructure, but I think one of the problems is that there's so much gray infrastructure that's in need of investment. Like, just think Montreal.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what will come of that. I'm hopeful, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Isn't earmarked for 3 different pockets, and one is green infrastructure and one is transit, so like roads, etc., or the roads the buses go on, and social infrastructure. Shameless self-promotion. I'm Robin and I work at the Ecology Action Center, and I think about stuff like this all the time. So something I'm really interested in seeing is not only having the green infrastructure money go towards green infrastructure, but also integrating green infrastructure into those other 2 pockets as well, and like climate projections and stuff like that. So there's room for smart infrastructure in all 3 of those pockets.
Cool. Nice.
That's a good point. The integration of these technologies is really important. For example, we do get drought. We should be harvesting water in a cistern, so if we do get drought and we want to irrigate, we don't have to use treated water. We don't actually irrigate our green roofs anymore. We do, usually in the first couple months, because we don't want them to die, but climate makes it easy here. It's usually pretty rainy, so. Other questions? Yeah.
Thanks for your very broad perspective on the development of this technology, this green technology. So really, the way I understand it is the technology tries to put a green veneer on a gray, predominantly gray infrastructure. What's happening here in Halifax is that basically green spaces are disappearing, such as Hemlock Ravine, all the buildup of Ponder Estates, Russell Lake, and perhaps, as you point out, that may not be all that much of an impact, considering that overall HIM is very much embedded in a very green environment. But I am curious, in a setting like this, in a geoclimatic setting like this, has there ever been made a comparison between this green veneer of, let's say you have 1,000 square meters of concrete and you put this green veneer onto this concrete, how does that compare to 1,000 square meters of the original vegetation
Yeah,
that was there?
there have been those studies done, and in general, I mean, with here, again, in our sort of geo context, forest would be the main ground cover. Nothing beats a forest. So, yeah, so a green roof compared to, on the other hand, we have green roofs downtown that have trees on them. Right? So you can build a forest on a green roof if you want, but again, the natural forest would be the best.
I meant really, you spoke about ecosystem function, right? So really measurable things like Bowden ratio.
Yeah. Again, forest.
Sequestration.
Yeah. Again, these measurements have been taken. So people have done these kinds of studies, and
In our setting here.
okay, not necessarily in our setting. I mean, there've been a handful of studies.
My second question is,
Yeah.
this green veneer, because it has been implemented in places, as much as I like it personally, but what about the associated pest control problems? Is that also an increasing cost factor?
Absolutely, yeah. If you're attracting more pests because of a certain, ecosystem you've created, then you're gonna have to spend money to combat it. One place this has come up is airports. So airports have bird control issues, and if airports are great for green roofs because you've got these low flat buildings with lots of roof space relative to interior, so they can make a big difference for the building. But if they attract birds, that's not great. So, what do we advise? Well, don't plant anything that makes red berries because birds can see red and they're attracted to red plants. And, there are things like that, things you can do to mitigate that. But, yeah, pests can be an issue for sure. Yeah.
You see this problem that is in Brazil now with the Zika virus and Aedes aegypti mosquito. Don't you see maybe a potential to have more green infrastructure, maybe ecosystem that could hold a predator of those mosquitoes, because in Brazil, where this area, there's a lot of slum areas with no green areas, and people use like water or puddles from rain, and the mosquito proliferates, but there's not much green area around.
Yeah. I mean, standing water, this is part of the problem with great infrastructure, right? There's places in Africa where, most of the mosquitoes were breeding in old tires, right? So it's just, we've created an ecosystem that mosquitoes thrive in, but the natural ecosystems or a more natural or a green infrastructure, you wouldn't have that much standing water, right? Because you've got soil to infiltrate that water. So it helps with, big pest problems or disease vector problems. So I think it's all part of the same picture. It's just another benefit of green infrastructure, I think, is, in some cases, birds that eat mosquitoes or bats that eat mosquitoes need habitat, right? So if we build that into our cities or bring it back into our cities once it's been lost, that can play a role. Definitely people talk about that anyways, having an impact on disease. But you need a lot of it, and yes, go
We
ahead.
should finish with
Yes.
one last question.
Yes, sorry.
I'm a first-year environmental studies student, and I was wondering if you had any recommendations for getting more involved in the Green Roof Project in the future.
Yeah, we hire summer students every year, basically. Right now, I've got a couple of second-year students who have approached me and they're hoping to get USRA funding, that kind of thing. I don't have money for them unless they get it, but we do have summer students every year, so we have lots of grad students working on it, but they need help as well. We also have honors students that work on this project, so by the time you get to fourth year, if you're really keen on this stuff. But yeah, we should talk after if you're really interested in this. So.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jeremy. That was really fascinating, and and I still envy you having that roof, but we'll work on that. Yeah, thanks, and hope everyone can join me in thanking Jeremy Lundholm.